He showed up to her mother's retirement party with another woman on his arm. A woman who was not his wife. A woman who wore a dress that cost more than the monthly rent on the apartment, where Sylvia Crane had spent her first 3 years in the city, surviving on foundation salary and quiet determination. He smiled at the guests. He accepted congratulations on behalf of a marriage he had been dismantling for 14 months. He did not know that the woman whose mother he was insulting in that ballroom was not who he believed her to be. He did not know that the retirement party he had attended, as an act of contempt, was the last event of his old life. He did not know that by the time the dessert course was served, the architecture of his destruction was already complete. Sylvia Crane was 38 years old and, by every visible measure, ordinary. She worked 4 days a week at a nonprofit focused on early childhood literacy. She drove a Subaru with a cracked rear bumper she had never gotten around to fixing. She wore her hair in the same low bun she had worn since graduate school, held in place with whatever elastic was closest. She attended neighborhood association meetings and remembered everyone's birthdays and kept a running grocery list on a notepad stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. What she did not advertise, what she had never once mentioned in the 11 years she had lived in Philadelphia apart from the life her family had built, was that her mother was Harriet Crane. Not Harriet Crane, the retired school teacher, which was also true, but Harriet Crane, the primary shareholder of Crane and Whitfield Development, a privately held commercial real estate company, operating across 8 states, that her late husband Sylvia's father had built over 35 years from a single construction loan and an absolute refusal to be outpaced. The company had no public profile. It appeared on no industry lists. It sponsored no events. Raymond Crane had believed, with the conviction of a man who had spent his life watching proximity to money corrupt everyone it touched, that the moment you made your wealth visible, you surrendered control of every relationship you had. He had raised his daughter in that belief before she could articulate it. She had absorbed it the way children absorb everything their parents teach them quietly, not as a lesson, but as the texture of the world. When Sylvia moved to Philadelphia at 27, she moved without the name attached to its meaning. She kept the surname because it was common enough. She took a salary that covered her expenses in a modest apartment and nothing she did not earn with her own hands. Her parents had supported the decision. Her father had called it the most important education she would ever receive. Raymond Crane died of a heart attack when Sylvia was 31. She had been married to Marcus Webb for 2 years. She met Marcus the way people meet in cities, at a friend's gathering, over a shared opinion about a bottle of wine being poured incorrectly. He was a senior analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm. He was easy with a room in a way that Sylvia, who tended to observe before she spoke, had found initially magnetic. He was comfortable in his own presence. He asked questions about her work that seemed genuine. He remembered small details from their first conversations and deployed them weeks later in a way that felt, at the time, like attentiveness. What it was, she would understand later, was research. They dated for 14 months. They married in a small ceremony in the backyard of her parents' house in Connecticut. Marcus contributed enthusiasm and a guest list that was mostly colleagues he wanted to impress. Sylvia planned everything else. This was the first fact. She filed it without judgment. The marriage organized itself within the first year into a shape that Sylvia would later recognize, with the clarity available only from a distance, as the shape of a woman doing everything, and a man doing nothing except occupying the result. She managed the household, the bills, the calendar, the dinners, the social obligations, the gifts his family received at Christmas that were selected and wrapped and mailed by Sylvia and thanked for with Marcus's name. She worked 4 days a week and spent the 5th on the domestic infrastructure of their shared life. And Marcus worked 5 days and spent the evenings at client dinners and the weekends recovering from the client dinners. And neither of them named what this arrangement was, because naming it would have required acknowledging that one of them was being asked to carry something the other would not touch. Harriet noticed. She had always been more direct than Raymond, who worked in silences and observations. Harriet used words. She said, on a Sunday afternoon visit 2 years into the marriage, while Marcus was golfing, and Sylvia was cleaning up from a dinner party that had ended 12 hours earlier, a man who lets you carry everything has already decided he doesn't need to earn his place. He just needs to keep it. Sylvia rinsed a wine glass. She did not respond. She filed the observation the way she had always filed her mother's observations. not as instruction, but as data, something to be returned to when the evidence caught up. The evidence arrived on a Tuesday. She was reviewing their joint credit card statement, a task she performed each month with the same methodical attention she brought to everything she considered her responsibility. When she saw a charge she did not recognize. A hotel in Center City. One night. $460. Dated on a Wednesday, when Marcus had told her he was at a 2-day conference in New York. She held the statement for a moment. She set it down. She made coffee. She went to work. She did not confront him. She began to document. Over the following 8 weeks, the picture assembled itself with the completeness of something that had always been there, waiting to be looked at directly. Hotel charges. Restaurant receipts at places Marcus had described as work dinners, confirmed to be tables for two. A contact in his phone listed under the name of a project that had been completed a year earlier. The contact was a woman named Britta Nolan, 32, a marketing director at a tech company downtown, who had, based on the Instagram account Sylvia found with 20 minutes of careful searching, been to the same hotel in Center City twice in the past 3 months. The affair had been running for approximately 6 months when Sylvia found the first evidence. What she felt, sitting in her car in the parking lot of the Literacy Foundation, with the hotel receipt pulled up on her screen, was not the thing she expected. Not the collapse she had been bracing for, consciously or not, since the moment her mother said what she said on that Sunday afternoon. What she felt was quieter than that, and more structural. The sensation of understanding a thing she had already known in the way you know a diagnosis, before the doctor confirms it, with a specific terrible accuracy that leaves no room for surprise. She called her mother that evening. "I know," Harriet said before Sylvia had finished describing it. "How long have you known?" 7 weeks. Your father's attorney flagged some activity in Marcus's professional filings that indicated he had been consulting a divorce lawyer. I had someone look further. Sylvia was quiet. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed to find it yourself." Harriet's voice was measured, the voice of a woman who had watched her husband build a fortune on the principle that knowledge held carefully was more powerful than knowledge deployed too soon. "If I had come to you with it, you would have had questions I couldn't answer. Now you have the evidence in your own hands. You know what you know." "What do I do?" "Nothing, not yet." A pause. "You change nothing. You let him believe everything is exactly as it was. And then we do what your father would have done. We build the room before we invite him into it." Sylvia sat in the kitchen of the house she managed, in the chair she had picked out, at the table she had refinished herself over a long weekend 3 years ago. And she felt something settle into place inside her. Not peace. Something more purposeful than peace. She made dinner. She set the table. Marcus came home and she asked about his day, and she listened and she said nothing about the hotel receipt or the encrypted folder she had already created, or the call she had just ended with a woman who was about to begin restructuring every financial instrument that bore Sylvia's name. Harriet Crane spent the following 11 months doing what Raymond Crane had spent a lifetime teaching her to do. She moved quietly and she moved precisely, and she moved in ways that left no visible evidence of their direction until they arrived. The assets were reviewed. Everything that had existed in joint or joint-adjacent structures during the marriage was identified, audited, and either firewalled in trust vehicles that required Sylvia's sole signature or documented with a thoroughness that would make any challenge to their provenance professionally inadvisable. Harriet also instructed Raymond's longtime attorney, a woman named Constance Frick, who had handled the family's legal architecture for 19 years, and who had the affect of someone who had seen every human failing twice and remained unmoved, to monitor Marcus's financial behavior. What Constance's team watched was a man who believed his wife was distracted by her work and her ordinary life and her ordinary income, and who had therefore begun to be careless, in the way that men become careless when they believe no one is paying attention. He moved money, $11,000 from their joint savings into a personal investment account, transferred on a Thursday evening, with the casual confidence of someone taking change from a jar he believed was his. He altered the beneficiary designation on a life insurance policy, removing Sylvia and listing himself. He consulted, on 3 separate occasions, a divorce attorney who specialized in high asset separation, which meant Marcus had concluded there were high assets to separate and was calculating how to position himself to reach them. He had not told his own attorney what he did not know. His attorney was therefore operating on a model of the marriage that was missing its most consequential variable. Then Harriet scheduled her retirement party. She had been planning to step back from the board for 2 years. Timing, she told Constance, was fortuitous. A retirement party was a natural occasion, a gathering of everyone who had known Raymond Crane, everyone who understood what the Crane name meant in certain rooms, everyone who would witness what came next. She did not tell Marcus about the guest list. She did not tell Marcus about the trust documents that were being finalized in Constance Frick's office that same week. She told him only the date and the venue, a private event space in Rittenhouse Square that she had rented under a holding company name, and she told him that Sylvia was hoping he would be there. Marcus came. He did not come alone. Britta Nolan walked beside him in a silk blouse, the color of champagne, and heels that announced her with each step across the marble floor. Her hand was in Marcus's. Her chin was at the angle of someone who had been told she had won something and believed the information was correct. The room registered their entrance, the way rooms register the wrong note in a familiar song. Heads turned. Conversations interrupted themselves. A particular quality of silence moved from the entrance toward the far wall, where Harriet Crane stood at the center of a group of people who had known her for 30 years, who understood in the span of a glance exactly what they were looking at. Sylvia was near the windows. She was speaking with a woman who had worked with Raymond for 2 decades. She saw Marcus and Britta enter. She watched Marcus scan the room with the specific expression of a man who has made a calculation and is checking his work. He found Sylvia's face, his expression adjusted to something that was meant to resemble sympathy. Sylvia returned his look. She looked at Britta. She looked at their joined hands. She looked back at Marcus. She excused herself from the conversation she was having. She picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. She crossed the room. Marcus. Her voice was level. Sylvie. He leaned forward to offer a cheek kiss with the ease of a man who believed confidence could substitute for decency. I know who she is. Sylvia looked at Britta, who had arranged her face into the expression of someone waiting to be properly introduced. I'm glad you could both make it. My mother will be making remarks at 8. She turned back toward the window. There are drinks at the bar. She walked back to the woman she had been speaking with. She did not look at Marcus again for the remainder of the party. He interpreted this as defeat. He saw the composure and read it as numbness. He saw the absence of confrontation and read it as surrender. He had been making this error for 3 years and had not yet learned that in Sylvia Crane, stillness was not absence. It was preparation. He had also just insulted, in a room full of witnesses, the woman whose mother was currently authorizing the final transfer of a real estate portfolio valued at $240 million into a trust structure he could not approach. He did not know this. He was already calculating his next move. In the 4 weeks following the retirement party, Marcus Webb accelerated with the impatience of a man who believes he has been patient long enough. He stopped coming home consistently. He offered no explanation when he didn't. When Sylvia texted to ask where he was, he replied with the words, I think we're both past pretending. He contacted his divorce attorney the following week. He wanted the house. He wanted half of Harriet's gift to them of a jointly titled investment account that had, in its original form, held $60,000 of Sylvia's foundation earnings and personal savings. He wanted it resolved quickly. He had the confidence of someone who had never been told his assumptions were wrong by anyone whose opinion he respected. He also did what Constance Frick's team had predicted, with the accuracy of people who had watched this particular pattern before. He transferred $22,000 from the joint investment account into his personal brokerage. He did this on a Sunday evening. He did it because he believed the account was marital property, and therefore his to access. He did it because he had been told by his attorney that assets moved before formal proceedings were complicated to recover. He did not know that the account was monitored. He did not know that the transfer was logged in real time. He did not know that moving jointly held assets after a spouse has initiated consultation with legal counsel constituted, under Pennsylvania law, a dissipation of marital assets, a fact that his own attorney would later communicate to him in a voice from which all professional optimism had been removed. Sylvia received the notification from Constance's office at 7:14 on Monday morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, a habit she had kept since her father used to read the paper at breakfast when she was small. She read the notification. She set her phone down. She finished her coffee. She folded the newspaper. She looked out the window at the garden, dormant now in November, the ground hard and pale. He ran, she thought, just far enough. She texted Constance. Schedule the meeting. The offices of Frick and Alderman occupied the 12th floor of a building on Market Street. The conference room had a long table, chairs that were expensive in the way of rooms where important things are decided, and windows that looked north across the city. Constance Frick had been doing estate and family law for 22 years. She had seen the full range of what people did to each other when money was involved. She had stopped being surprised by any of it 17 years ago. She had, however, retained a certain satisfaction in the particular type of meeting she was about to conduct. Marcus arrived first. He wore a dark suit. He brought his attorney, a man named Gerald Quill, who had built a practice around high-asset divorce cases, and who had been assured by his client that the marital estate was modest and the opposition would be unrepresented by serious counsel. Gerald Quill had not yet received the document package that Constance's paralegal had sent to his office that morning. His assistant had flagged it as urgent. He had not yet read it. He was about to have a morning that would require him to substantially revise his professional self-assessment. Sylvia arrived at 9. She wore a gray blazer over a dark shirt. No rings. No earrings. A thin bracelet on her left wrist, rose gold, engraved on the inside in her father's handwriting with a phrase she had never shown anyone. Pay attention. She had worn it every day since the week after he died. It was worth, materially, perhaps $800. Its actual value was not a number. She sat across from Marcus. She did not look at him with heat or with injury. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has finished something and is waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. Constance opened her briefcase. She removed 2 folders. She placed them on the table. Before we discuss division of assets, she said, addressing Gerald Quill with the measured courtesy of someone who does not need to perform authority, I need to establish an accurate picture of what this marriage actually contains. Gerald nodded with the confidence of a man who believed he already knew the answer. The residential property on Walnut Street, Constance began. Mr. Webb's position is that this is a jointly owned marital asset. That is not accurate. She opened the first folder. The property is titled to the Crane Family Trust, established in 2009, 6 years prior to the marriage. Mr. Webb's name does not appear on the title, the mortgage, or any associated documentation. He has occupied the property during the marriage, but he has never had a legal interest in it. Gerald's pen paused on his notepad. He looked at his client. Marcus looked at the folder. The joint investment account at Vanguard. Constance continued. Mr. Webb transferred $22,000 from this account to his personal brokerage on November 3rd. This transfer occurred after Mr. Webb had already initiated consultations with divorce counsel. Under Pennsylvania statute, this constitutes dissipation of marital assets. We have the transfer record, the date, and the documentation of prior legal consultation establishing intent. The room had a particular quality of silence now, the kind that exists when everyone present is calculating at speed and arriving at different conclusions. The life insurance policy. Constance placed a second document on the table, originally naming both spouses, amended by Mr. Webb in September to list himself as sole beneficiary. This amendment was not disclosed to Mrs. Webb. We have both the original designation and the amended filing. Gerald Quill set down his pen. He looked at Marcus with the expression of an attorney who has just learned that his client omitted several material facts from their initial consultation. Constance opened the second folder. Regarding the estate of Harriet Crane, she said. She looked at Marcus directly. Her gaze was professional and entirely without warmth. Mr. Webb appears to operate under the assumption that his wife is a non-profit employee of modest means, and that whatever inheritance she may receive from her mother's estate would be subject to equitable distribution. She placed a single page on the table. Crane and Whitfield Development is a privately held commercial real estate company operating across 8 states. It is the primary holding of the Crane Family Trust. The trust's current valuation, as of the most recent audit, is $243 million. She paused. The trust was established before the marriage. Its assets have never been commingled with marital funds. They are not subject to equitable distribution under Pennsylvania law. They are not accessible to Mr. Webb. They have never been accessible to Mr. Webb. The silence in the room was total. Gerald Quill looked at the document for a long time. The number was there in clear type. He looked at it the way you look at something that requires your brain to recalibrate an entire model before you can respond. Marcus looked at Sylvia. His expression moved through several phases in the span of about 4 seconds. Confusion, recalculation, something that was trying to be composure but was becoming something else entirely. That's... He stopped. He started again. You never. Constance continued as though he had not spoken. Given the documented pattern of financial misconduct, Mrs. Webb's legal team will be filing for full recovery of dissipated assets plus applicable damages. Mr. Webb's current legal exposure is conservatively estimated at $90,000, inclusive of the unauthorized transfer, altered beneficiary designations, and associated court costs. Gerald Quill turned to Marcus. His voice, when he spoke, had the specific flatness of a professional who has stopped being an advocate and started being a person trying to limit damage. We need to take a recess. Marcus did not move. He was still looking at Sylvia. There was something in his face now that she had not seen in 3 years of marriage. Something unperformed. You knew, he said. His voice was low. You knew the whole time. Sylvia looked at him. 3 seconds. 4. I knew you filed the hotel stay under the conference expense account, she said. Her voice was the same voice she had used for every ordinary conversation in their marriage. Calm, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never needed to raise it. I knew about Britta. I knew about the attorney. I knew about the money. I knew about the insurance policy. She paused. My mother knew before I did. She spent the past year making sure that when you finally stopped pretending, there would be nothing for you to take. Marcus's hands were flat on the table. She could see the effort he was putting into stillness. You brought her to my mother's retirement party, Sylvia said. You stood in a room full of people who built the world you thought you were inheriting, and you introduced her as though that were a normal thing for a husband to do. You looked at me, and you thought you were watching me accept a loss. She stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at him. You were watching me finish. She walked to the door. Constance gathered the documents and followed with the efficiency of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how it ends. At the door, Sylvia paused. She did not turn around. The Walnut Street house will be relocked by Friday, she said. Your belongings will be boxed and delivered to whatever address you provide to Constance's office. The joint accounts are frozen pending resolution of the dissipation claim. The Vanguard transfer has been flagged with the court. She opened the door. Goodbye, Marcus. It came apart the way things come apart when their foundation was never solid to begin with. Not in a single collapse, but in a sequence of weekly revelations, each one removing another surface that Marcus had believed was floor. Week 1, the house. Legal notice sent. Personal effects boxed by a professional service and delivered to the address he provided, which was Britta's apartment in Northern Liberties, because there was nowhere else. Week 2, the firm. A compliance review triggered by the divorce filing, standard procedure, uncovered the dissipation claim in his legal disclosures. His managing director called him in. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. He left without his security badge. Week 3, the money. The joint accounts frozen. The Vanguard transfer held in pending litigation. His personal credit cards, which he had been using to maintain the version of himself that Britta had signed on for, began to register declines. Week 4, Britta. She had been drawn to Marcus as a complete proposition. The suits, the client dinners at restaurants with no prices on the menu. The house in Rittenhouse she had visited and assumed was his. The career trajectory he described with such fluency that it had never occurred to her to verify it. Without the house, without the income, without the professional standing, without the domestic infrastructure that Sylvia had built and maintained for 3 years so seamlessly that it had never required acknowledgement. Marcus Webb was a man on administrative leave in his girlfriend's apartment, with 4 boxes of belongings and a legal exposure that compounded each week. Britta was 32 and practical, in the way of someone who had made decisions for herself since 22 and did not intend to stop. She looked at the man sitting on her couch at 2 in the afternoon with the hollow expression of someone whose bet hadn't paid, and she understood that this was not who she had chosen. She told him on a Thursday, not unkindly. She said she thought they wanted different things and that she wished him well. She asked him to be out by the weekend. Marcus sat in his car in her parking garage for 40 minutes. He had no house, no job, no wife, no girlfriend, no accessible money. No professional reputation on which to borrow against the future. Every surface had been removed, and beneath them there was nothing that was his. There had never been anything that was his. The substance had belonged to the woman he had spent 3 years treating as a convenience. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sylvia Crane took her full place in the life she had spent 11 years living beside without acknowledgement. She joined the Crane and Whitfield board, the position her father had always intended for her, and took over the foundation's philanthropic arm that Harriet had been running on reduced capacity. She expanded its focus from literacy to include affordable housing development and early education access for working single parents. She committed $30 million over 4 years, drawn from her personal allocation of the trust. She hired a team of 12. She also kept her job at the literacy nonprofit 2 days a week. When the Philadelphia Inquirer asked her, for a profile published in the spring, why she had maintained such a modest public life for over a decade, she was quiet for a moment before she answered. "My father taught me that the moment you make your wealth visible, people stop seeing you and start seeing it," she said. "I wanted to know what people saw when there was nothing to see except me." The reporter asked whether she had found the answer. Sylvia looked out the window of the foundation's new office, 3 floors above the street, in a building her family had owned since 1991. "Yes," she said. "It took a while. But yes." The profile ran with a photograph taken at the foundation's opening event. Sylvia had a lectern, blazer, hair back, the rose gold bracelet catching the light. Her expression was the one Marcus had looked for in the conference room, and not found, not the quiet, contained look of a woman managing herself carefully, but something else entirely. The expression of a woman who has stopped managing and started arriving. The photograph was used in a campaign the foundation ran that summer, appearing on transit posters across the city, above a single line of text. "The work that holds everything up." Marcus saw one at the suburban station on a Thursday morning in August. He was early for a job interview at a firm that was smaller than 3 he had applied to and been rejected by. His suit needed pressing. He had rescheduled the interview twice, both times for reasons he could not have explained precisely. He stood on the platform and looked at the photograph for a long time. He had lived inside the structure she built for 3 years and never once looked at the builder. He had seen someone quiet and assumed the quiet meant empty. He had seen patience and read it as passivity. He had seen a woman who asked nothing of the room and assumed that meant she had nothing to offer. He had been wrong in every direction, and the wrongness was not a single mistake he had made at some identifiable moment. It was the entire premise, the assumption, installed so early and so deeply that it had never required examination, that the person making everything run smoothly was doing so because she had no alternative, that the woman who never raised her voice was someone who had nothing to say. The train came. He got on. The poster disappeared. He carried the image of her face with him in the kind of silence that arrives when you finally understand something too late. To do anything with the understanding except live inside it. Harriet Crane visited Sylvia on a Sunday in March, driving herself from Connecticut, in the car she had driven for 9 years, and intended to drive for 9 more. She sat in Sylvia's kitchen, in the house on Walnut Street, that had been rekeyed and repainted and quietly rearranged into something that felt, for the first time, like it belonged only to its occupant. They drank coffee from mismatched mugs, a habit from childhood, and Harriet asked the questions she always asked, about the work, about the team, about the programs. She did not ask about Marcus. She had not asked about Marcus since the divorce was finalized. She had, Sylvia understood, already closed that chapter with the same efficient precision she applied to everything. At some point in the late morning, Harriet looked at the bracelet on Sylvia's wrist. "Your father would have liked how this turned out," she said. Sylvia turned the bracelet slightly on her wrist. She thought about him at his kitchen table, reading the paper, the specific quality of his attention when he was listening. The way he had said, at the end, after the diagnosis, after the arrangements, "You were always paying attention. You just didn't always know what you were paying attention to. Now you do." "He would have liked that you did most of the work," Sylvia said. Harriet smiled. It was a small smile, the smile of someone who does not need an audience for it. "He would have liked that you let me." The morning light moved across the kitchen floor. Outside, the city went about its business, indifferent and ongoing. Sylvia finished her coffee and thought about the week ahead. The site visit, the board meeting, the 2 days at the nonprofit where she would sit across from children who were learning to read and would not know and did not need to know anything about what she carried outside those walls. She thought about her father's instruction. Pay attention. She had worn it on her wrist for 7 years, without being entirely sure she understood it. She thought she understood it now. Paying attention was not the same as waiting. It was not patience in the passive sense, the kind that hopes something will improve. It was something more active, more demanding. It was the practice of seeing clearly in conditions designed to prevent clear sight. through flattery and assumption, and the particular distortion that money created around every relationship it touched. She had paid attention. She had seen what was real. And when the moment came, she had not fought for anything because there had been nothing to fight. She had simply withdrawn from a system that had never deserved her and watched it discover, too late, what it had been built on. The quiet ones do not announce what they're holding. They simply hold it, and they wait. And one day the people who mistook their silence for vacancy look up and find out what silence actually sounds like when it finally fills a room.